seemed to be so interested and careful about the viewpoint of Bounderby towards his family. At the mention of this name, his daughter stole a look at him, remarkable for its intense and searching character. He saw nothing of it. What he repeated presently, what would Mr. Bounderby? So he was very curious about how Mr. Bounderby would react to the behavior of his kids. With the conclusion of chapter 3, the writer mentioned the name Bounderby, a new character, and now in chapter 4 he started the chapter with this name. So it is important, according to the writer, to present and develop the character of Bounderby as far as he is an unimportant character in the novel. Mr. Bounderby. Who was Mr. Bounderby? Why Mr. Bounderby was near being Mr. Gradgrind's bosom friend as a man perfectly devoid of sentiment. So, a description of the character of Bounderby starts from the very beginning. He was a rich man, إنسان شخص غني, banker, merchant, manufacturer, and whatnot, everything. A big loud man with a stir and metallic laugh. A man made out of a coarse material, which seemed to have been stretched to make so much of him. A man with a great puffed head and forehead, swelled veins in his temples, and such a strained skin to his face. So this is the physical description of the character of Bounderby. This sentence is important, considering Bounderby as the bully of humility. Humility means humble, being humble, التواضع. Bounderby looked older. His 7 or 8 and 40 might have had the 7 or 8 added to it again. So he is 7 or 8 and 40. Yani 47 or 48 years old. So, visiting the family of Gradgrind, Bounderby explains himself when he talks to Mrs. Gradgrind. He says, this is a quotation, "I hadn't a shoe to my foot." ما كان عندي a shoe for my foot. As to a stocking, and also a stocking, حتى جوارب ما كان عنده. I didn't know such a thing by name. I passed the day in a ditch. أمضيت اليوم في حفرة أيام السابقة. And the night in a pigsty. That's the way I spent my 10th birthday. لحد 10 سنوات. Not that a ditch was new to me, for I was born in a ditch. Here, a short introduction of Mrs. Gradgrind, a little, thin, white, pink-eyed bundle of shoals of surpassing feebleness, mental and bodily, who was always taking physic without any effect, and who, whenever she showed the symptom of coming to life, was invariably stunned by some weighty piece of fact tumbling on her. Gradgrind hoped it was a dry ditch. After introducing her, she started thinking of the way Bounderby described his life. A dry ditch, حفرة جافة وليست مليئة بالماء. But Bounderby said no, as wet as a sop. A foot of water in it, said Bounderby, enough to give a baby cold. Cold, I was born with inflammation of the lungs, of everything else I believe that was capable of inflammation, Bounderby. For years, ma'am, I was one of the most miserable little wretches ever seen. I was so sickly that I was always moaning and groaning. I was so ragged and dirty that you wouldn't have touched me with a pair of tongues. So, this is how Bounderby describes the kind of life he had when he was a child. He was born in a ditch, he didn't have a shoe, he didn't have socks, and He was always sick because of the weather, because he did not have enough clothes. So he tries to portray how he started from scratch, how he was, or how he had nothing. He had no money, no clothes, and how he became later. How I fought through it, I don't know, said Bounderby. I was determined, I suppose. I have been a determined character in later life, and I suppose I was then. Here I am, Mrs. Gradgrind, anyhow, and nobody to thank for my being here but myself. So he considers that he made himself by himself. He should not thank anybody except himself. My mother bolted, ma'am, said Bounderby, and she was stunned because of the behavior of his mother. And he says, this sentence is important, according to the best of my remembrance, he remembers, my grandmother was the wickedest and the worst old woman, his grandmother, that ever lived. If I got a little pair of shoes by any chance, she would take them off and sell them for drink. She takes his shoes and sell them in order to buy drinks. Why, I have known that grandmother of mine lie in her bed and drink her 14 glasses of liquor before her breakfast. So he continues with describing his character. As soon as I was big enough to run away, of course I ran away. Then I became a young vagabond. أصبحت شابا متشردا. And instead of one old woman knocking me about and starving me, بدلا من امرأة واحدة تطرحني أرضا وتجوعني, everybody of all ages knocked me about and starved me. I was to pull through, I suppose. Whether I was to do it or not, ma'am, I did it. I pulled through. Nobody threw me out a rope. So he wasn't held by anybody, according to his speech. So he was a vagabond, متشرد, then errand boy, vagabond, laborer, porter, clerk, chief manager, small partner, Josiah Bounderby of Cooktown. Those are the antecedents and the culmination. So this is the process of his life. The writer tries to show him as a very simple character. According to his own description, he might be correct and he might be lying to us. So we don't take everything for granted, everything he says. Then we move forward. Then he was introduced to the case of Thomas and Louisa, who were caught at the circus, peeping on the circus people. He spoke of young Thomas, but he looked at Louisa. We were peeping at the circus, muttered Louisa haftily, without lifting up her eyes, and father caught us. And then they started blaming them. And I'm trying to skip things we don't need. And then Bounderby said, Mr. Gradgrind, drawing a chair to the fire, you are always so interested in my young people, particularly in Louisa, that I make no apology for saying to you, I am very much vexed by this discovery. So he seems to be embarrassed in front of Bounderby. Later they try to inquire how they have changed, why they have changed, and then they discover that there is an effect at the school that have influenced Tom and Louisa, which is Sissy. You have one of those Trollo's children in the school, Cecilia Jupe by name, said Gradgrind with something of a stricken look at his friend. So now stop a bit, cried Bounderby. How did she come there? Why, the fact is I saw the girl myself for the first time only just now. So they think that Sissy has a strong effect on the children of the school and she must be kicked out of the school. Now I tell you what, Gradgrind, said Bounderby, turn this girl to the right about, and there is an end of it. Send this girl away from the school, and there is no more negative effect on your children. And he agrees. So they agree to go to Sissy's father in order to stop Sissy from coming to school again. So here interferes Bounderby. It's all right now, Louisa. It's all right, young Thomas, said Bounderby. You won't do so anymore. I'll answer for it. Being all over with father. Well, Louisa, that's worth a kiss, isn't it? And here we understand the kind of standpoint between Louisa and Bounderby. How she looks at Bounderby and how he considers her. So he wanted to kiss Louisa for settling everything down. After always my pet, ain't you, Louisa, said Bounderby goodbye. And then she started rubbing the cheek he had kissed with her handkerchief until it was burning red. She was still doing this for minutes. What are you about, Lou? Her brother asked. You will rub a hole in your face. راح تحفرين حفرة بوجهك, because she is rubbing her face. You may cut the piece out with your penknife if you like, Tom. I wouldn't cry. This gives us an idea how she does not like Bounderby and his behaviors, and how Bounderby likes Louisa and likes to be very close to her. This foreshadows some kind of relationship in the future. From this, we might expect that Bounderby might propose to Louisa, might marry her in the future, but we also understand that Louisa does not like him and she does not like being close to him. These are the main points in chapter 4. Chapter 4 talks about Bounderby. Bounderby and the description of his character, how he describes himself as a self-made man, Rajul Isami, and how he's had a very tough and difficult life when he was still a child, and how he built himself. And then he is introduced to the house or the family of Gradgrind, and how he reacted towards the issue of Tom and Louisa, and how Louisa reacted to him at the end of the chapter. This is chapter 4, Mr. Bounderby. Whereas chapter 3, Loophole, it started with a very important title. Loophole, I did not talk about this. Loophole means fatha, or means thaghra. So this thaghra has two meanings. Thaghra in the circus wall, في جدار السيركس, where Thomas and Louisa were standing and peeking at the circus. And it also means a thaghra in the system of Gradgrind, because it is not a very secure system, because it is weak, so it has so many loopholes which will lead to the destruction of the system in the future. Okay, so these are the main ideas and most important things in chapter 3 and 4. This is for our lecture, for our Tuesday lecture. I will post it and expect any questions to be posted in the comments.